This video is sponsored by Manscaped. So it's the hottest topic under the sun today, especially for fans of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, if you don't know what's going on with Toronto and their entire off-season and how exactly things ended off in the playoffs, then I'm sorry to tell you this, but you've been living under a rock. Go over onto NHL.com, take a look at Instagram, take a look at social media, take a look at what has happened with the Leafs. Because when it comes to the aftermath of their choke, I'm just going to say it flat out, it's a choke. There are so many conversations that we are having today about players on the team, potential trades to be made, shakeups in how your overall organization is run if you're Kyle Dubas, and potential moves on the horizon. Obviously, the biggest one is highlighted in the title of this video. It's Mitch Marner. He's a man who, if you know the NHL, you know exactly who this guy is because he is one of the top paid NHL players in the entire league. He is supposed to be the golden boy for Toronto who was going out here making plays and all that. Yet it's been 18 straight playoff games where Mitch Marner has yet to record a goal, and his series against the Montreal Canadiens was ultimately lackluster, especially compared to Austin Matthews, who was actually going out there making efforts and getting opportunities, as well as William Nylander, who scored a boatload of goals. Mitch Marner has been the odd man out in many people's eyes because he is one of the most expensive players on the team, despite the fact he is one of the most ineffective when the playoffs commence. Which is why Mitch Marner trade ideas have been floating around the past few days, and it all culminates here in an article that was published by Luke Fox a few days ago. Here's a Maple Leafs mailbag for ya. Is there a way to win a Mitch Marner trade? Now, Mitch Marner is indeed the top-paid winger in the entire National Hockey League for the 2021 season. Artemi Panarin has a higher AAV, but his salary this year was $13 million. Mitch Marner, on the other hand, was $15 million in a salary. He was the second highest-paid player in the NHL, behind only his teammate Austin Matthews. But with Mitch Marner's overall performance, I guess, or let's just say lack of performance, there's been a very big questionable conversation of killer instinct and overall drive that has gone around about this Maple Leafs team, especially with the guys who are getting paid the most to perform the biggest. Marner, in which he has not done the latter. So this article from Luke Fox goes over the idea as to whether or not the Leafs could even win a Mitch Marner trade, bearing all the controversy and all the hypothetical trade situations that are floating around social media. Fox says that a Marner trade has been the most popular of this week's mailbag cuts to the core, and with William Nylander silencing critics with his 5-goal performance, the hounds have been released on Mitch Marner. Despite the fact that management, Marner's teammates, and all of them publicly have said that despite the fact that Marner is at his lowest point in his career, they all stand by him. If management has any appetite for a summer blockbuster, the structure of Marner's front-loaded deal, much like Nylander's, makes him an enticing target for organizations trying to save actual dollars in a pandemic-crushed business. Fox writes that if Kyle Dubas were to trade Marner, you need to get a player in return that aligns with Marner's bet on young skill vision to make Toronto a better team now. Which is why the names like Laine and Tkachuk and Seth Jones don't really work, because when it comes to the pure value that these kinds of players can add to a team, Marner just has more. Like it or not, Mitch Marner in the regular season is a top point producer, and he was one of the best players in the entire NHL in regular season point production. But it's that lack of killer instinct that makes Leafs fans question, is it really worth it, having this guy who is so good, who can produce so many points, but who just disappears when the going gets tough in the playoffs, and he plays off his playoff performance as if it's all up to luck and how he didn't really do anything wrong. The accountability is something here that a lot of Leafs fans have been triggered by as well, which feeds even more to the Mitch Marner discussion. So if the names like Laine and Matthew Tkachuk and Seth Jones aren't enough, then who would be? Before we get into that though, big word from our sponsor for today's video, Manscaped. We have some big breaking news. This important PSA is brought to you by the folks over at Manscaped, because the best new trimmer is now on the market, the Lawnmower 4.0. which is available for purchase in the USA and Canada. The new trimmer was just released only moments ago, and we are one of the first to get our hands on it and share the news. What makes this trimmer different than all the others? A new multi-function on and off switch that has a travel lock for one, a 4000K LED spotlight, and full customization with additional guard length sizes 1 through 4. It's waterproof and it's got wireless charging. Hey, Father's Day is coming up. Maybe the Weed Whacker will fit your needs instead. The best nose and ear hair trimmer on the market. Maybe some cologne too, who knows? Get 20% off and free shipping with code LEGOROCKS99 at manscaped.com. Again, 20% off and free shipping with the code LEGOROCKS99. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. If those previously mentioned names aren't enough, then who would be? Luke Fox writes this. Were Buffalo Sabres GM Kevin Adams to call about his unhappy captain, however, I'm picking up. Jack Eichel's $10.5 million AAV would give the Leafs an extra $903,000 in annual cap space, while saving the cost-conscious Sabres some real-life money. Furthermore, John Tavares' injury has exposed the lack of Toronto's center depth. The implication here is that one of the only ways to win a Mitch Marner trade if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs and you're trading Marner away is to acquire Jack Eichel in return. Now, Jack Eichel is the other big guy who is in trade conversations, but not for the same reason that Marner is in trade conversations. Marner's in these because everybody's speculating as to whether or not his performance was poor enough that you can justify trading him. Eichel's in a position where it's very legitimately documented that he just wants out, and the Sabres are apparently done with this guy too. And so we entertain the most Toronto Maple Leafs kind of discussion we can have out there. Take any one of the big fish, the top dogs on the market, and say, oh, would they fit in Toronto? Could you see them come to Toronto? How many points could they put up with Toronto? Would you think they would want to go to Toronto? That's kind of the conversation that we see all the time on sports media, especially here on the Sports Network and on Sportsnet, which is why a lot of other Canadian hockey fans who don't like the Maple Leafs get really upset because everybody caters to Toronto media, but hey, why not talk about it? Because it actually kind of does make sense in this aspect. If you're out here as a Buffalo Sabres team, Eichel wants out, and you're like, okay, the money technically works out here, why don't we try Marner for Eichel? It would make sense in theory for Toronto because, as the article points out, after John Tavares was out, you had Matthews as a first-line center, but what else? The depth trailed off significantly at C, and if you have Jack Eichel with Tavares, with Matthews, you have yourselves a 1-2-3 core at the center position that is among the best the NHL has ever seen in terms of pure talent. Despite the fact that yes, Marner was actually drafted as a center, I believe, from the London Knights, he was playing right wing the entire time with Austin Matthews. Sheldon Keefe didn't try to let Marner drive his own line against Montreal. Fox also notes that the biggest caveat with Jack Eichel is his health. We've been talking the entire time about the neck surgery and how he wants to get it, but how the Sabres don't want him to get it because his recovery to the point that he can still play hockey at a high level, it's not guaranteed, which is why if you're any team going out there maybe trading for a Jack Eichel, you need to be really, really positive that the plan that you lay out or the plan that he lays out for himself is proper. But just thinking about the possibilities here, Austin Matthews was drafted first overall by the Toronto Maple Leafs in 2016. Matthews, however, was born just a few days after the cutoff for the 2015 NHL draft, making him one of the oldest players in 2016's crop of players. Had Matthews been born just a little bit earlier and been eligible for that 2015 draft with McDavid and Eichel, there were so many people out there saying, man, if he was just able to be drafted here, I honestly think he could go second overall. That was the big debate coming out of these analysts and draft people as to whether or not Austin Matthews was good enough to be considered a definitive top 2 or just slightly behind Eichel at a third overall spot. So if you have a scenario where you have Eichel and Matthews on your team at the same time, this is literally the pinnacle of American ice hockey. And whether or not Mitch Marner, by himself, maybe with something else or whatever, is enough to get that back, Luke Fox says it's something you need to consider. To not explore such an option would be foolish. And It is interesting just considering all the variables here, because when it comes to winning a Marner trade, quote-unquote, that's extremely difficult to do. Firstly, you can't just trade Marner for anything. You have to trade for a certain amount of money, because there's a ton of money attached to Marner, and you have to trade for a certain amount of capital to justify that value. You can't just say, okay, Marner for 5 first-round picks, because, sure, the value, you could debate it's there, but the money. And so when you go to players, you have to say, okay, well, is Marner really worth Brandon Sutter, Louis Eriksson, and another guy? Sure, maybe contract-wise they cost the same, but the value isn't there. Jack Eichel is one of the only players in the NHL who is even remotely close to that value. I'd argue that maybe Jack Eichel has a little bit more, it's just that the neck surgery really does bring him down, which is kind of why this conversation might be a little bit silly to some people. But it's kind of the only conversation you can have. Marner, at the end of the day, is a superstar. Sure, he doesn't show up in the playoffs, but he's a superstar. And you trade superstars for superstars. If you're trading a superstar for many mid-tier pieces and a draft pick, you're losing that trade. Plain and simple. So that's kind of why Luke Fox is illustrating it in this way, where the only real way to win it, even if you're getting a Laine or a Seth Jones or a Tkachuk or whatever, you're still not winning unless you get a guy who is legitimately that good. And Eichel, he's that good. He went before Marner in the draft for a reason. So, talk to me in the comments what you think about this entire video over here. Winning a Marner trade via acquiring Jack Eichel. Would you see it? Could you see it? Do you want to see this happen? I hope you enjoyed this video. Trolls 99. And bye.